I never really thought drumming would take me as far as it did, and maybe it's because I never really had any expectations for it. I always really did it for fun, and I just kind of worked and worked until I got to a spot I really wanted. I started drumming when I was in third grade, maybe when I was like 9, and I really did it just for the fun of it, to be honest. Really started to take it more seriously in high school, as I started to learn more about drumming and, as I kind of grew as a person. One thing I learned early on was how precise the fulcrum was of the stick, how precise you have to hold it to get optimal drumming or optimal movement, if you will. That fulcrum is so important because it underlies a lot of the rhythms that drummers do. It allows us to let the stick do a lot more of the work while we're just kind of letting it bounce, as my drum instructor always used to say. And drummers are important to the band, mostly because they're objectively the loudest instruments. They're the ones you probably first hear. They're the ones that kind of set the tempo for the band. Another important thing with drumming is the difference between accented notes and non-accented notes, which we call taps, and just being able to control that with the fulcrum of, again, the index finger and the thumb, and just being able to keep certain notes up and certain notes down. The rule is the accents are really the only notes you should really hear. And I think learning all these skills was pretty humbling, to say the least. I was always, pretty bad my freshman or sophomore year, and then it just kind of clicked my junior year of high school. But, I really can't count how many times I failed, trying different things, but I would never have done it differently. I would rather fail trying hard things than, not doing it at all. And, I've been in my school's marching band in my freshman year, but my sophomore year, I was able to join the drum line, which was a humbling experience, to say the least, just because of how many upperclassmen were on the drum line, but it also became a learning opportunity very quickly. And that year I also added on the twist of marching, which I had never really been familiar with before. I knew what it was, but I never really marched, and I never really marched with a drum on either. And I really can't explain how weird that feeling is for the first time, to have like a 40 or 50 pound drum on you while you're trying to move and play at the same time. But I really did put a lot of time into marching, and it became fun after a while. It definitely was not fun at first, just having to learn the different movements and have to think about walking, which I'd never really done before. But it got fun after a while. That year, my sophomore year, when I was on the drum line, I think that really just reinforced how much repetition there really was in marching band. We had a set show that we practiced every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes it wasn't fun to rehearse the same things over and over, especially if maybe you weren't that good at them, which obviously you're not going to be at first. But it just kind of showed how much work it would take to not only get good at something, but to stay good at it as well. And our motto was always, you do it until you can't mess it up anymore. And obviously for me that took a little bit, but it was definitely worth the work. And that sophomore year, it ended in a state championship for our high school marching band. And that felt really cool to be a part of, especially because I felt like we had really earned it. It was pretty smooth sailing the whole year. We had won at a lot of competitions, but obviously championships is where it matters. And we had a really good performance and won our first state championship in over 40 years. And my junior year was pretty different. Like I said, my sophomore year, drumline was filled with mostly upperclassmen, and those upperclassmen graduated. So my junior year, I was kind of thrust into a leadership position. Not necessarily that I didn't want to be in it, but I really didn't have a choice. And that year was pretty difficult. And I remember that band camp, which is basically like a 2-week period in the summer where we just kind of grind for like 8 to 9 hours a day, just grinding on the show, marching, playing, whatever. I just remember how grueling those days were, especially because the drum line was getting yelled at all the time. It was definitely a stark contrast from the previous year, where it felt like it was mostly smooth sailing. But eventually we kind of picked it up, and you could really tell when the newer members were starting to get things going, and you could really tell when we had started to build a big chemistry. In my junior year, it ended in another state championship, the first time our school had ever gone back to back. And again, I always look at that year as more fulfilling. And if drumming has taught me anything else, I think it told me how to fail. You really, you have to fail in order to succeed, but it's really hard to know how to fail if you don't try something new. My senior year didn't end with the state title, and although it was really disappointing, I felt like I had my best performance as a drummer, and at some point, that's all you can really ask of yourself, is to do your best.